Cane toads are on the march, sweeping across northern Australia into the wilds of the Kimberley. It's been disastrous for local wildlife, but local rangers are taking on the toads with the help of science.
In 1935, Australia made a decision that would haunt the continent for the next 90 years. A government agricultural board, frustrated with greyback cane beetles eating through the Queensland crop, ordered the import of 101 cane toads, Rainella marina, from Hawaii. The toads were released in the cane fields of Gordonvale that summer. They were supposed to eat the beetles, save the harvest, and quietly fade into the ecosystem. They did none of those things. Today, 90 years later, the descendants of those 101 toads number somewhere north of 200 million. They have spread across roughly half of the Australian continent. They have driven native quolls, goannas, freshwater crocodiles, and dozens of snake species into local extinction by poisoning anything that tries to eat them. Every weapon Australia has thrown at them has failed. Fences, traps, poisons, government bounties, genetic studies, a national mood of furious resignation. Nothing has stopped them. Until a team of biologists at Fogg Dam in the Northern Territory started watching the ground. What they found is the single most effective natural predator of the cane toad on the continent of Australia. It does not have venom. It does not have teeth. It weighs less than a grain of rice, and it is currently killing baby cane toads at the edge of every tropical waterway in the country without anyone telling it to. This is what scientists found, and why even they were not prepared for the numbers. The cane toad is one of the most successful biological disasters in recorded history. The animal that arrived in Australia in 1935 was the South American giant toad, Rainella marina. An adult can grow to 9 inches long, weigh more than 2 pounds, and produce a milky toxin from 2 parotoid glands behind its eyes that contains a class of compounds called bufadienolides. These compounds do exactly one thing inside a vertebrate body through sodium pump disruption. They stop the heart. For 90 years, every Australian predator that has tried to eat a cane toad has died. Quolls, the small carnivorous marsupials that once thrived across the north, have collapsed to single-digit population fractions across entire territories. Yellow-spotted goannas, the large monitor lizards of the tropical floodplains, have dropped by as much as 90% in toad-invaded zones. Freshwater crocodiles have died with toads in their stomachs. The toxin doesn't care what's eating it. It kills the heart, and that's the end. Australia has thrown nearly every conventional tool at the problem, trapping programs that captured millions of toads, citizen bounties, a failed experiment with the ranavirus that nearly contaminated native frog species, genetic engineering proposals, government-funded eradication zones. None of it has reduced the spreading front. The toads simply keep moving west, somewhere between 30 and 60 kilometers a year, eating native insects, breeding in every body of standing water, and poisoning anything that tries to slow them down. Then, in 2009, an honors student at the University of Sydney named Georgia Ward Fear, working with Team Bufo Research Group, was doing fieldwork at Fogg Dam, a freshwater system about an hour east of Darwin. She was studying the metamorph stage of the cane toad, the brief window when the toads first leave the water as fully formed but tiny terrestrial animals, less than half an inch long. It is the most vulnerable point in their life cycle. They are too small to carry significant toxin. They are forced to stay near the water's edge to avoid drying out, and the edges of those tropical water bodies are, as Ward Fear's team would document, covered in something else. Meet ants, specifically Iridomyrmex reburrus, a large, aggressive, red and black species native to most of the Australian continent. They live in open colonies near water. They are scavengers and opportunistic predators. They have no sting. They rely on sheer numbers, mechanical force, and a chemical secretion to subdue prey. And what Ward Fear and her supervisors, ecologists Richard Shine and Gregory Brown, observed at Fogg Dam over the next year was unlike anything in the existing predator literature. In their 2-minute field trials, 98% of newly transformed cane toads encountered at least one meat ant. 84% of those toads were attacked. Of the toads attacked at high ant density, more than 80% were killed outright. The metamorphs that escaped the initial swarm did not survive long either. 88% of escapees were dead within 24 hours from the injuries they sustained. The published numbers came out in the Journal of Applied Ecology in April of 2010. The team measured them against the same metrics applied to 7 species of native Australian frog. The native frogs walked through the ant zones without incident. The toads were destroyed. The question the researchers asked next is the one that changes the whole story. Why does this work? It works because the cane toad's defense system is a vertebrate weapon, and the meat ant isn't a vertebrate. Bufadienolides, the toxins the toad spent millions of years evolving, target the cardiac glycoside receptors of animals with hearts through NAKATPase inhibition. Ants don't have hearts in the same sense. They have a dorsal vessel that pumps hemolymph. The toxin doesn't engage the target it was built for. The compound that drops a goanna in seconds does essentially nothing to Iridomyrmex. The second mismatch is behavioral. Australian native frogs evolved alongside meat ants for tens of millions of years. They are nocturnal. They sit still when threatened. They detect approaching insects by vibration and freeze. The cane toad, evolved in South America with no meat ant equivalent in its ecosystem, is active during the day, in the open at exactly the times the ants are foraging. It hops in short, slow, predictable bursts that meat ants can intercept. It does not recognize the ants as a threat until they have already made contact. By then, it is over. The team also documented a third factor, one that explains why this isn't just an interesting curiosity, but a viable continent-scale tool. Meat ant densities can be artificially increased. Wardfear and her colleagues used cat food, distributed in small portions along the water margins. Ant numbers at those sites quadrupled. Toad mortality quadrupled with them. The implications are quietly enormous. Australia has been trying for 9 decades to find a control mechanism for the cane toad that does not introduce another invasive species, does not threaten native frog populations, and does not require chemical poisons that move through the food chain. The meat ant is already here. It is native across most of the toad's current and projected range. It does not harm native frogs in the same way. It does not require breeding programs. It only requires that human beings give it slightly more incentive to be at the water's edge during the few weeks per year when baby toads emerge from the pond. The Ward Fear team's work has continued. There are now ongoing field trials. There are detailed studies of how cattle hoof prints in the mud interact with ant predation. There are proposals to plant the specific tree species the ants prefer near known toad breeding sites. The strategy has not eradicated the cane toad. Nothing will. But for the first time since 1935, Australia has a native, self-sustaining, biologically clean predator that kills more baby cane toads per square meter than any introduced species ever could. The most poisonous amphibian on the continent. The one nothing was supposed to be able to eat. Being taken apart every summer by an insect that fits on a fingernail. This is the part that scientists keep coming back to in the published discussion sections of their papers. The cane toad was never invincible. The defense it brought from South America was perfectly tuned for South American predators. When it arrived in Australia, the ecosystem hadn't yet figured out how to read it. 90 years later, one small piece of that ecosystem has. The toads will keep spreading. They will keep moving west. They will continue to kill quolls and goannas and snakes that don't know any better than to try. But behind the wave, in the country the toads have already conquered, something quieter is happening. The ground is full of insects that don't care about the toxin. And every season, when the metamorphs leave the water, fewer of them make it past the first meter of shore, the smallest animal in the food chain, doing what no government program could.